I prepared the packages for my friends in the States, dangling earrings woven into half moons. I write them a message. Wear these earrings to your meetings, parties, and on the bus. And when people ask you where you got them, you tell them. They're from the Marshall Islands. Show them where it is on a map. Tell them that we are a proud peoples, toasted brown like the carved ribs of tree trunks. We are the descendants of the world's finest navigators, and our islands dropped from the baskets of giants. We are the hollow hulls of canoes splicing through the Pacific, the harmonies of mothers, sisters, aunties whose songs go deep into the night. We are the broken beer bottles burrowed in white sand, children flung like rubber bands across roads clogged with chugging cars. Tell them we only have one road. And after you tell them all of this, tell them about the water. Tell them about how we've seen it rising, flooding our cemeteries, crashing over our seawalls and crashing into our houses. Tell them what it's like to see the ocean level with the land. Tell them we're afraid. Tell them we don't know of science, of politics, and that some of us are old fishermen who believe that God made us a promise. Tell them that some of us are a little bit more skeptical. But most importantly, you tell them that we don't want to leave. We never wanted to leave, and we are nothing without our islands. This is a poem by climate activist Kathy Jetsnil-Tenjner from the Republic of the Marshall Islands, one of the lowest lying nation states in the world. The Republic of the Marshall Islands are acutely vulnerable to flooding and sea level rise, and the effect that this has on people is ag production, their economy, their livelihood, and their health. It also affects their adaptive capacity to respond to these frequent climactic shocks. And despite the poet's dictum that we don't want to leave, we never wanted to leave, many Marshall Islanders are experiencing these changes and are migrating to larger islands within the Marshalls as well as to the US. In the millennium, there were 7,000 Marshallese in the US, and in 2010, that rose to 22,000. So why should you care about the Marshall Islands? As a precursor to climate change, the Marshall Islands was used as the US's nuclear testing site. And the cumulative impact of those nuclear bombs is 7,200 times that of Hiroshima. And in response, under the Compact of the Free Association, Marshallese people are allowed to live and work in the US. They pay local, federal, and state income taxes. This contributes to food stamps, to Medicaid, and to educational welfare programs. However, by law, people under the Compact of Free Association are not eligible for this welfare. One of the destination sites that Marshallese migrants are moving to is Hawaii. Now, Hawaii has a state of emergency for homelessness, and 20% of that homeless population are Marshall Islanders. This is an area of Oahu close to Diamond Head, and this is the Kaka'ako encampment, also known as the village. However, we don't currently know, there is no metric to understand the extent to which Marshall Islanders are already migrating because of climate change and the impact to ecosystem services. Nor do we understand whether this migration is a successful adaptation strategy. Factors triggering migration are often complex and intertwined, and thus it's very difficult to pinpoint a specific solution when we're thinking from a public policy perspective. So saying that, I am working with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the Pacific Island Climate Science Center to understand to what extent are climate stresses and their impacts on ecosystem services impacting livelihoods and habitability, and how is this already driving migration? And then what are the impacts of migration on source and destination areas? So my specific focus is Hawaii, and I want to understand what are Marshall Islanders who've already migrated, what are their rationales for migrating, and what is the impact of migration on migrants? For example, what are the environmental, cultural, social, economic costs and losses? So through a kind of extensive interview process and a literature review of the climate migration nexus, I'm going to be using a participatory research approach, namely Q methodology. So Q method is a means of examining unmeasurable values by being able to convert qualitative, subjective data into quantitative info. So my counterparts in the Marshall Islands that are studying those that are in the source area and how climate change is affecting them, this is them piloting the Q method. So my expectations are that the causality is primarily indirect and that it will be mostly how climate stresses are affecting ecosystem services and livelihoods, and then that would then trigger migration.
Can you explain a little bit more about the Q method and how that turns into measurable results that can be acted on?
Yes, sure. So the Q method is semi-qualitative and semi-quantitative. And so the process is you create a universe of Q statements, and so that's to represent a kind of landscape of perceptions around what could be the drivers for migration. The participant then separates this into kind of agree, neutral, and disagree, these three categories. We then spread this in a more kind of ornate bell curve fashion, where it's 0 in the center, -5 and +5. And these statements, it's interesting because the participant not only has to rate the statement, but has to rank it in relation to other statements, with the ones on the outside being areas where they feel more, aggressively for or against. And so the Q method is beneficial because each of these statements has a code and then you give it a value. And so you're able to turn something that's qualitative into something quantitative. And by nature, you can have a smaller sample size and still produce publishable results that can then inform or disprove other quantitative data, and then this can progress into agent-based modeling. The Q study would be used initially, you'd collect demographic data on the participant, conduct the Q sort, and then afterwards have a sort of semi-structured interview where you ask someone to unpack, so why is this something you really agree with? Why was this the most important factor for you? Mary?
So, are you going to be implementing this methodology only in Hawaii with people that have already migrated, or are you also going to be in the Marshall Islands? And if you are going to be in the Marshall Islands, what is sort of the game plan for how you're going to reach out to vulnerable communities that are so sort of displaced already?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our research team is, we have a team that are based in the Marshall Islands with the Marshall Islands Conservation Society and the United Nations University, and they are currently in the Marshalls doing this study, and so their sample size is around 200, and the focus of the study is on changes to ecosystem services. How can we quantify that, and how is that affecting people's decisions? Because we're working with the Marshall Islands Conservation Society, they already have links with the community and can speak Marshallese and are from that community. And so they're going to both rural and urban islands because the atolls are really different in their how urbanized they are. So I'm specifically focusing on those that have already migrated. And yeah, it's a super vulnerable population. It's going to be like low English levels. Mm-hmm. And so that's definitely a challenge that I found in designing this research framework, in trying to understand how can I build trust and gain respect within this community. So what I've done is almost a network mapping of organizations that work with the Marshallese in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. So shelters, We Are Oceania, education programs, to try and churches are a huge congregation area for the Marshallese community. And so hoping that they can facilitate an introduction. In addition, with my counterparts in the Marshall Islands, they've collected data of, have your family or your friends move to Hawaii. And so that has also been a platform from which we're going to explore that. Thank you.